What happens when we die? Is it darkness, nothingness, heaven, hell, or something we can't even begin to imagine? For most of his life, Howard Storm had no patience for spiritual questions. He was a man of intellect, logic, and certainty. A professor of art, well-read, well-traveled, and an atheist. In his mind, life ended when the body did. No afterlife, no God, no soul. But in June of 1985, everything changed. What began as a routine trip to Paris with his students turned into something no philosophy, no textbook, no scientific theory could ever explain. Howard Storm died, and what he found was darkness. Not a peaceful black void, not an empty unconsciousness, but a place of pain, torment, and ultimately, salvation. In the next few minutes, you're going to hear the true story of a man who went to what can only be described as hell, cried out into the void, and was pulled into the arms of a being of unimaginable love. This is not a parable, not fiction, not symbolic. These are the words of a man who came back changed forever and has spent the rest of his life sharing what he saw, what he learned, and what awaits us all. Whether you believe in life after death or not, I ask you to listen with an open mind. Because if Howard Storm's experience is real, then everything we think we know about life, death, and the soul might just be wrong. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. Just another stop on a college tour in the heart of Paris, where Professor Howard Storm was leading a group of art students through some of the most treasured galleries in the world. It was June 1st, 1985, warm, vibrant, full of life. The air buzzed with creativity, curiosity, and the sounds of a city steeped in beauty and history. Howard, a tall, confident man in his 40s, had always prided himself on intellect. He was a former army man, turned artist, turned professor, a logical thinker, a realist, and without hesitation, an atheist. Not the casual kind either. Howard didn't just doubt God, he dismissed the idea entirely. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under our carefully arranged beliefs. It began suddenly, without warning, a sharp, stabbing pain in his abdomen. So intense, so immediate, it felt like something inside him had ruptured. He collapsed in his hotel room, gasping, clutching his side. His wife frantically called for help. Students watched in stunned silence. He was rushed to a local hospital, a facility far from what he was used to in the United States. The diagnosis came quickly: a perforated duodenum, a hole in the stomach wall. Deadly. Without emergency surgery, he would die. But here's the twist. The hospital had no surgeon on duty. It was the weekend. They couldn't operate. Howard was left in a hospital bed, in excruciating pain, waiting. Hours passed. His condition worsened. No morphine, no help. Just the ache of something tearing inside his body, and the slow descent into what he thought would be his final moments. And then, something strange happened. The pain stopped. Instantly. Not faded. Stopped. Howard opened his eyes, and the room looked different, clearer somehow, sharper. But when he looked around, he noticed something chilling. His wife was still sitting next to the bed, but she wasn't reacting to him anymore. The nurses walked right past him. He tried calling out. Nothing. And then he looked at the bed and saw himself lying there, lifeless. That's when he realized he had died. But he didn't feel dead. In fact, he felt more alive than ever before. No pain, no fear, just awareness, heightened, sharpened. He stood up, or rather, his consciousness did. It was like walking without legs, moving without effort. Then came the voices. Distant at first, then louder, calling his name. "Howard, come with us." He turned toward the door. Beyond it was a hallway, dark, murky, but seemingly endless. The voices came from within it. They sounded familiar, even friendly, comforting. So he followed. At this point, it's easy to ask, why follow disembodied voices into the dark? But if you had just died, and you were being called gently by others who sounded kind, wouldn't you follow too? The deeper Howard moved into that hallway, the darker it became. The walls faded. The air grew cold. The voices changed. Their tone shifted from welcoming to mocking. And slowly, he realized he was not among friends. He was surrounded. Figures moved in the shadows, and they were waiting for him. What happens next is something Howard Storm never expected, because this wasn't heaven. This wasn't peaceful. This was something else entirely. A place most of us pretend doesn't exist. But Howard Storm was about to walk straight into it, a realm of pain, cruelty, and despair, where light does not shine. And the only way out is through something far greater than himself. The voices kept calling, not loudly, not forcefully, but urgently. They beckoned Howard forward, deeper into the murky hallway beyond the hospital room, away from the cold, lifeless body he'd just left behind. "Howard, come with us, hurry." And so he did. What else was there to do? He was dead or something like it, and this strange sensation of floating, walking, existing in a state between matter and thought felt eerily normal. The voices had a certain pull, but the further he followed them, the more uneasy he felt. The corridor stretched endlessly. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling, just a greyish fog all around him. A twilight space with no direction, no depth. The light from the hospital room behind him was fading fast, and ahead there was only shadow. That's when the whispers started. The friendly tones of before were gone. Now they hissed and muttered. Their voices grew sharper, crueler, laughing. "You don't belong here. You're ours now. This is what you deserve." Then the shapes came, figures, not fully visible in the fog, but moving, surrounding him. Howard felt hands grasp him, first lightly, then violently. He tried to resist, but these beings, whatever they were, overpowered him with ease. They began to pull, tear, scratch, not metaphorically. He felt it. Real pain, real suffering. They bit him, kicked him, mocked him, and worse, they enjoyed it. "You thought you were so smart," they said, "so important. Where's your God now?" It was a place beyond cruelty, a place where torment wasn't random. It was personal, calculated, as though these entities knew his weaknesses, his fears, his pride, and used them like weapons. He was being unmade, and all the while they laughed. Now here's the part that challenges everything we think we know about death. Because Howard Storm had been a man of intellect, a man of evidence, of structure. If you had asked him the day before, he would have told you death was a void, an unconscious end, nothing more. But this was conscious torment. And the worst part, he felt utterly alone. There was no help, no voice in the distance, no exit sign, just him and these beings, feeding off his suffering. What kind of place was this? Was this hell? Had he created it somehow? Howard began to remember things, moments in his life, times he had belittled others, times he had been cruel without remorse, how he had shut people out, argued, mocked, looked down on those who believed in faith or hope or something bigger than themselves. And in this void, it all came back. He wasn't just being tortured physically, he was being shown himself. All of it, without filters, without excuses. A mirror held up to his soul, and what he saw made him want to vanish. He lay there, whatever there was, in the filth and the shadows, broken in body and spirit. And that's when something happened, something strange, from somewhere deep within, past the mind, past the ego. A memory stirred, a voice, a feeling, a name, Jesus. He hadn't thought of Jesus in years, not since childhood really, and even then, it was more ritual than relationship. But now, with nowhere else to turn, no one else to call, he whispered the only thing he could. Jesus, help me. The moment the name left his lips, everything changed. Like the cracking of a shell. The torment stopped. The beings fell back. And then, a light. Soft at first, then brilliant. Blinding. But not in a painful way. It radiated warmth, love, and something else. Something deeper. Truth. And then, that light moved toward him. It reached out, not with arms, but with presence. A love that overwhelmed every part of him. A voice, not heard but known, spoke inside him. I have always loved you. Even when you didn't know me. Even now. For the first time, Howard wept, not from pain, but from relief. Because in that moment, he knew. He was not lost. He was not abandoned. He was being saved. The darkness could not follow, and what lay ahead would be unlike anything he had ever imagined. The light didn't just shine. It wrapped around him. It didn't speak with words. It spoke through knowing. Howard Storm wasn't simply seeing a divine presence. He was being embraced by it. Every broken, scarred part of him. Every moment of fear, cruelty, and pride absorbed in that radiant love. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was something deeper, a complete, unconditional acceptance. The kind of love that, once you feel it, makes you wonder if you've ever truly known love at all. And then, the light took him. Not forcefully, but with a sense of sacred guidance. He was no longer in that dark void. The figures were gone. The pain was gone. His questions, his doubts, his identity, all seemed to dissolve in the brilliance that surrounded him. What came next? Howard has tried to explain for decades, and yet, by his own admission, words fail. It was as if I was being shown the truth behind reality, he later said. The fabric of everything. He was surrounded now, not by clouds and harps, but by beings of light. They were radiant, formless, intimately familiar, and yet utterly beyond human comprehension. These were not angels in the storybook sense. They were something far more ancient and intelligent. They communicated without mouths, thought to thought, concept to concept. Howard asked questions, thousands of them, and the answers came instantly, flooding into him like warm water. What is the purpose of life? Why is there suffering? Is there meaning in the universe? And one by one, he understood, not intellectually, but completely. Every answer felt like a missing piece clicking into place. But here's the catch. When he returned to his body later, he couldn't recall all of it. It was as if the knowledge had been too vast for the human brain to hold. But during that tour, during that heavenly experience, Howard knew things that would shake the foundations of how we understand life. He saw a realm of impossible beauty, landscapes that shimmered with living light, fields that hummed with music, colours he had no words for, blues deeper than any ocean, golds that pulsed like fire. And most astonishing of all, he saw his life review. But this was no slideshow. Howard relived moments from his life, but from a perspective he'd never known before. The other side. He felt what others had felt when he spoke to them, when he hurt them, when he ignored someone, when he uplifted someone. Every word, every action, echoing through other people's hearts. And through it all, the beings of light watched with complete love. Not judgment. They weren't there to condemn. They were there to teach, to show him how he had lived and how he could live differently. "Why do I matter so much?" Howard asked. The answer came like a breeze. Because every soul matters. Because love is the foundation of everything. He was shown humanity, not as a fallen species, but as children still learning, struggling, failing, trying again. And yet, always loved. He was told about the interconnectedness of all life, that what we do to one another, we do to ourselves, that every kind gesture ripples across creation, that forgiveness is more powerful than we realize, that heaven is not a reward. It's a state of being aligned with love, truth, and divine purpose. Howard asked if he could stay, and they said, no, it wasn't time. There was more for him to do, more to learn, more to give. He didn't want to leave. After all, who would choose to return to a broken body and a broken world when you've tasted eternity? But they told him something that would stay with him forever. You must go back and love the people. Those words echoed through him, and with that, the light faded. The beauty, the warmth, the pure essence of divine reality, slowly receding. He felt his soul being pulled downward, back through the layers. The radiance slipped away, until finally, he woke up, in the same hospital bed, in the same broken body. But everything had changed. The room looked different. The world felt different. Because now, Howard Storm had seen what lies on the other side, and he would never, ever be the same. The moment Howard Storm woke up in his hospital bed, he knew everything had changed. Not just his body, which still ached and trembled from the trauma it had endured. Not just his surroundings, which suddenly seemed dull and muted after the colours and harmony of the world he had just left. No, what had changed was far deeper. His very soul had been rewritten, and yet the physical world greeted him with cold detachment. There were no angelic beings in the room now, no radiant light pouring from unseen skies, just the sterile flicker of hospital lights, the distant beeping of machines, and the concerned gaze of his wife. She had no idea what he had just experienced. No one did. And that's where the torment began anew, not of the body, but of the mind. How do you explain the infinite with a human tongue? How do you describe eternity in 10-minute conversations? In the hours and days that followed, Howard found himself facing a new kind of battle. Should he speak up or stay silent? What he had seen was real, more real than anything he had ever known. But would anyone believe it? After all, he was an atheist professor, a man who had spent decades ridiculing belief. He had scoffed at spiritual people, debated religion with scorn, and built a life upon the solid, observable ground of reason. And now he was supposed to come back from the dead and talk about angels, about beings of light, about a Jesus who answered prayers and held him in unconditional love. What would his colleagues say? What would his students think? Would anyone take him seriously again? And yet, the call remained. That voice, that presence, those words he could never forget. You must go back and love the people. So what did that mean? Was he supposed to start preaching? Join a church? He had no background in religion. He didn't even know where to begin. But he knew this much. He had been given a choice, not during the experience, but now, in its aftermath, to either return to his old life, pretend it was all a hallucination, and push it down into the depths of his memory, or to live the rest of his days honoring what he had seen, and he couldn't forget it, not even for a moment. The light had marked him. So, slowly, nervously, he began to speak, first to his wife, then to a nurse, then a friend. Each time he told the story, and each time he expected ridicule. But what he found instead was curiosity, quiet tears, long silences, people asking questions they'd never dared to speak out loud. Do you really think there's something after this? Did it feel like love? What did they say about God? The story began to spread, and with it, something strange began to happen inside Howard. He wasn't just changing spiritually, he was changing in every possible way. His temper, which had once been legendary, faded. His ego, once the driving force behind every achievement, seemed irrelevant. His ambition, once measured in awards and status, now revolved around service. He left his position at the university. He entered seminary. He became a pastor. Howard Storm, once a man who laughed at believers, now stood in front of congregations talking about heaven, light, and love. And yet, he was no longer interested in dogma. What he had seen wasn't about rules or rituals. It was about relationship. With each other. With truth. With the divine. He would later say, "They didn't tell me what church to join. They didn't give me a religion. They told me to love. And that was more powerful than any sermon I'd ever heard." But even now, decades later, Howard Storm still reflects on that choice, not whether to believe. It was never a matter of belief. He knew it was real. The choice he wrestled with was how to share it, in a world that is afraid of the truth, afraid of what comes after, afraid that maybe, just maybe, this life isn't all there is. And if that's true, then the way we live now might matter far more than we think. When Howard Storm returned from the experience, it wasn't just a shift in worldview. It was as if someone had taken everything he thought he was and burned it down to the foundation. And then something new began to rise. But rebuilding a life after an experience like that isn't like flipping a switch. It's more like trying to walk after your legs have forgotten what gravity feels like. The world was still the same, but he wasn't. He noticed things immediately. The way people talked, the way they looked at each other, the small lies we tell to survive, the rush to judge, the need to be right, the noise. Howard could feel the pain behind people's eyes, the emptiness in their hearts. The disconnection, so familiar to him before, now stood out like static in a symphony. He began to speak more gently. He listened more than he talked. He found himself helping people he once would have ignored, not because he had to, but because something in him had changed. He wanted to. He felt their pain, because he had lived it. And he'd seen the antidote. Love, not romantic love, not sentimental love, but a foundational love. A love that underpins reality itself, a force, a presence. The beings of light hadn't shown him some pearly gated fantasy. They had shown him the very DNA of the universe, and it was love. So now, his task was simple and terrifying. Bring that love here. Bring it into this world, into traffic, into arguments, into bureaucracy, resentment, pain, injustice, and ignorance. He left his job as a professor, a respected, stable position. His peers thought he was losing his mind. Some said it directly, others whispered, but Howard knew something they didn't. This life, this moment-to-moment journey, it's not just about success or legacy. It's about soul. "I couldn't go back to being who I was," he said. "That person died in Paris." He pursued theology, not to become religious, but to try and understand, to get closer to what he saw, what he felt. He didn't need to be convinced of God's existence. He had been held by that presence, and that presence had told him to love. So he did. He became a pastor, not the fire and brimstone kind, but the kind who would sit for hours with someone dying in a hospital bed, just to hold their hand. He spoke in prisons, to skeptics, to churches, to atheists, to people just like his old self, angry, lost, defensive. And he didn't argue with them. He understood them, because he had been them. And now, he just wanted to help. People would ask, "Do you really believe what you experienced was real?" And he would always say the same thing: "No, I don't believe it. I know it." He knew what it felt like to be swallowed by darkness. He knew what it felt like to be lifted into light. And most of all, he knew that we're not alone. Not now. Not ever. The greatest lie we tell ourselves, he once said, is that no one sees us, that no one cares, that we are separate, but we are never, ever separate. He dedicated his life to reminding people of that, in every sermon, in every quiet conversation, in every moment of service. Howard Storm became the living embodiment of his own message, and perhaps the most remarkable part of his transformation. He never forgot the darkness. He never sugar-coated what he went through. He told people, clearly, that there are realms of pain, realms of torment, realms that respond to the hatred, the cruelty, the spiritual blindness we carry. But he also told them, we don't have to stay there, that even in the lowest pit, a whisper of surrender is heard. That one cry for help, just one, can summon a love so powerful, so personal, so real, that it breaks the universe open. That's what happened to him. That's what he returned to tell us. And that's what makes Howard Storm not just a man who died, but a man who was remade. Howard Storm didn't come back from the dead just to tell a story. He came back with a message, not a dogma, not a theology, not a system of rules or beliefs, but something much simpler and far more difficult. Love the people. That was what the beings of light told him. That was what the presence, the one he now calls Jesus, impressed upon his soul. Not once, not as a suggestion, but again and again, love the people. But what does that really mean? Is it just kindness, politeness, a smile on the sidewalk? Or is it something deeper, something radical? Because the kind of love Howard was shown wasn't convenient. It wasn't based on agreement or comfort or common ground. It was absolute. He saw with undeniable clarity that every soul matters, that the people we judge, avoid, or fear are fragments of the same divine light we claim to seek. He was shown that we are interconnected, not metaphorically, but literally, that what we do to others, we do to ourselves, that every thought, word, and action creates waves, rippling across hearts, generations, even dimensions, and that in the end, we will be asked one question: did you love? Howard Storm has shared his story all over the world, in interviews, in churches, in universities, in quiet conversations and public platforms. And every time, people ask the same things. Is heaven real? Is there really a hell? What happens when we die? And his answers, though rooted in his own experience, always point back to this: what matters is how we live now. Not out of fear of punishment, but out of the opportunity to participate in something divine. Because love, as Howard now knows, is not a human emotion. It is the very structure of existence, a force, a law more fundamental than gravity, a truth that can only be seen fully once you leave this body behind. But what if we didn't have to wait until death to see it? What if we could begin to live that way now? To treat strangers as sacred, to forgive without needing repayment, to serve without recognition, to listen without needing to speak. That's the message Howard Storm brought back. Not a vision of escape, but an invitation to transform. Because hell, he says, isn't a punishment. It's a place we drift toward when we choose selfishness, pride, and fear over love. And heaven? Heaven is being in alignment with love, with light, with God. He doesn't tell people to fear death. He tells them to live, to truly live, with intention, with grace, and with the awareness that every interaction matters. Howard often says that people expect a spiritual message to be complicated, mystical, wrapped in coded language, but it's not. It's simple. We are loved, and we are meant to love. And the more we do, the closer we come to the truth behind everything. When people hear his story, they often ask themselves, would I have called out in the dark? Would anyone have answered me? Howard's answer is always the same. You don't have to wait for death to ask. The voice that answered me is with you now. Always has been. The message isn't just for those who have crossed over. It's for all of us. Every day we're alive, we're writing our own life review. Every moment is a thread in the tapestry of our soul. And when the time comes, when the body falls away and the light begins to rise, we won't be asked how much we earned, how many people we impressed, how closely we followed the rules. We'll be asked, did you love? And if that question makes you pause, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's where it starts. You've just heard the story of a man who died and came back forever changed. A man who thought he understood life until he left it. A man who believed in nothing until he was shown everything. Howard Storm's journey is not just about what happens after we die. It's about what we do while we're still here, because his story challenges all of us to look inward, to ask questions we don't usually ask. What kind of energy do I bring into the world? Do my words heal or hurt? Am I living with purpose or just passing time? We chase so many things: success, security, status. But in the end, none of that follows us into the next realm. What does follow us is love. The love we gave, the love we received, the love we chose, even when it was hard. And maybe, just maybe, that's what this whole journey has been about. Not escaping death, but learning how to live. So, let me leave you with the same message Howard Storm was given on the other side. Love the people. The annoying ones. The ones who don't agree with you. The ones who are hurting but can't ask for help. The ones who remind you of your own brokenness. Love them, because they are you. And you are them. And in the end, that may be the only thing that truly matters. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think differently about life, death, or what might come next, then I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A moment of peace, light, or presence that felt not of this world? Share it in the comments. You never know who needs to read it. And if you want to explore more stories like this, real journeys that touch the edge of life and beyond, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here. You are not alone. Whispering, you are loved. You've always been loved.